On March
20th, 2020, the world was graced with Doom Eternal. Though it took a little time to adjust to the tighter rule set, it gave us one of the most engaging first-person combat systems ever given to the medium. Every mechanic in the game has a distinct purpose, lending it a sense of intentionality not seen for a long while. It was a distinct step up from the looser gameplay of Doom 2016 only 4 years prior, where instead of being given the title of Slayer on a silver platter, you were expected to earn it through blood, sweat, and huge guts. Little baby Slayer running around with a super shotgun grew up into ripped daddy Slayer using every tool in the box. Doom Eternal grew up from its beginning in 2016, and 2016 itself grew up from its own beginning. A seed planted 23 years before.
Doom 1993 is old, but I wouldn't say that it should be dismissed for that. Despite how much better I think Eternal and 2016 are, I would still be willing to say that 1993 is a masterpiece all on its own. I would even be willing to say it's on par with them. The transition from 2D to 3D was a very awkward process. Many games on PC were slowly paced because the machine they were on couldn't really process what arcade machines and home consoles could, so it felt less like a game and more like you being shown a bunch of pictures. Any decisions the player made were so few and far between, you almost forget you're playing a fucking video game. This could be why people are so quick to cite Wolfenstein as the first 3D game, and it definitely deserves some credit for being the building blocks to what would later become Doom. Yes, technically Maze Wars is the first actual FPS game, but most FPS games, especially during the 90s, owe their tropes to Wolfenstein and its counterparts.
Now, around the early 1990s, some nerds who had worked in a provisionary games division at some computer company decided to go off and make their own game company. Ideas from the deep grew legs and walked on land as id Software, helmed mainly by John Romero and all-seeing architect of the fragile fabric of reality, John Carmack. Carmack figured out how to do side-scrolling on computers, which was a big fucking deal. So then they made a side-scrolling adventure platformer called Commander Keen. You might have heard of it. And then after that, they bought an Apple II game IP from a dead studio and made a first-person shooter out of it called Wolfenstein 3D. You might have also heard about that. Needless to say, the results advanced computer graphics by at least a year or two.
Wolfenstein was a rather simple game in every aspect, from its morality to its controls. I mean, it's a game where you kill Nazis. Literally. But the game was what stuck out to me. In Wolfenstein, you were able to look left, right, but you couldn't look up or down. This is because there's only so much you can do with raycasting on a top-down map. While this might seem like an issue on the surface, the game never really introduced a reason these functions would be necessary. The obstacles and challenges in Wolfenstein are a lot less about roadblocks and a lot more about enemies and enemy types. They all had varying sounds associated with them with differing amount of health, speed, fired hit scan attacks at distinct rates. The player would be introduced to these enemy types and would in turn memorize how each of them work as the game went on. The challenge came less from the enemies in question, and a lot more in how the player was forced to handle different combinations of them, like combat chess. You were given a relatively wide variety of weapons to use, from a minigun to a revolver to an MP40. Different guns had varying purposes, like some would work better against specific types of Nazis. The game urged the player to learn these gun types in and out and use them whenever they might be appropriate. It's this variety that opens the floodgates for creativity when it comes to Wolfenstein, but no matter how unique you try to make the Nazi enemies, it doesn't change how limiting it feels to only be killing people. The Wolfenstein games were too realistic. I mean, look at this. This is exactly what Hitler's base was like. No, but in all seriousness, the idea of basing a game on something as real as World War II might be satisfying on the surface, but one, it pissed off stupid people who hate video games and only ever saw the Nazi imagery, so they assumed that this was a Nazi game even though they're literally fucking killing Nazis. And two, no matter how unique you make these Nazis, they're all still just Nazis with guns and nothing more. And, well, it gets boring after a while. So that's why they needed to get a little bit more creative with it. What if instead of killing human beings, you killed otherworldly beings?
The original idea id Software had was that they'd get a hold of the Alien license from 20th Century Fox, but when they said, no, fuck off, they'd had to get a little more creative. The setting of a space base was kept, but rather than little green men, the opposition was made up of the demonic legions of hell.
This would up the intensity of the gameplay, and it would also make your enemies much more intimidating. On top of that, there was definitely no controversy. It was still controversial due to the satanic imagery. But satanic imagery is cool. It's just as cool as killing Nazis. So Doom was mostly the same game already. You still couldn't look up or down, and you still can't jump. This was also the game that started introducing upper levels with higher elevations and pits you can fall in. Carmack's new engine was playing around with binary space partitioning, which I can't even begin to explain, mostly because I don't really understand it myself. Regardless, for a game where you can't look up or down or jump, this does seem like an issue at first. Despite that, they luckily included an auto-target system that allows you to kill enemies at different elevations. If you could see it, you could shoot it. Just look in the general direction. You can't jump. The lava and other damaging textures take a second to hit. This means you can get around small areas without taking damage so long as you were cautious. Even at the time they were aware of their limitations and did their best to work around it, but the game isn't perfect. I mean, it's old. Of course it isn't. The lack of crosshairs, leaving the player guessing where they're shooting, is definitely an issue. You also don't really get much directional input on where enemies are when they hit you. Although my main issues were things like having to back out of something to wait for it to reset. Doors closing on their own often obstructs the player's ability to fight. Like this time I got stuck with a Baron in a tight room for trying to set off an environmental trigger. I got out just fine, but the doors in the game are often extremely annoying because of situations like this. Also, with it being dated, the game can be pretty broken at times too.
Ooh, crap. I am actually legitimately stuck here. Well, balls. I think I have to... I'm actually stuck. Do I have something I can kill myself with? You have got to be fucking kidding me. I haven't been saving along the way either. Fuck me. Alright, we're gonna have to start from the beginning.
While things like this are few and far between, it's unfair to have to start the entire level over just because of a hiccup like this. I think the thing that sets Doom apart from Wolfenstein is obviously the enemies. Firstly, these enemies are not rooting for the same team. If a stray projectile from one enemy hits another, they may start attacking each other. This can be used tactically to your advantage, especially with big groups. But secondly, there are all kinds of creative and often at times terrifying monsters that the game throws at you. Demons are these faster opponents that have close range attacks. Cacko demons are flying monsters with far range attack. First time you see one is in a narrow corridor while the player has more space to learn the ins and outs of their attack method. It's a much more tanky version of imps with more reach due to its ability to fly. Lost Souls are flying monsters with charging attacks. They further impede on the player's ability to fight off groups of monsters due to their quick speed and small hitboxes. The enemies are introduced more and more as the game goes on, so the pacing isn't too overwhelming. When an enemy makes its first appearance, it's treated like a brand new encounter. Barons start off as a boss fight, then are implemented all the same as a recurring opponent. They're still just as hard as they were, but you, the player, learn how to handle them better as the game goes on. You aren't stronger than them now because you leveled up, you're stronger because you earned it. One of my favorite opponents is the Cyber Demon. His rocket attacks have splash damage, direct hit or not, and a direct hit can kill you in one shot even if you have a full stack. You fight him in this open area with pillars keeping your distance and constantly moving. He tries his best to close this distance, and you have to concentrate at all times. Alongside the variety of enemies, every gun introduced in the game has its own unique and special use, and with exception to the pistol, will be guaranteed to be useful even at the end of the game. The plasma rifle is a faster, more powerful option for when you're in a bind, and it's great against Cacko demons at Barons. The shotgun is my usual go-to for most enemies, as it's easily the most comfortable and plentifully loaded gun to have at the ready. The chain gun is great to pull out when you trip a trap since it stun locks opponents. The chainsaw is great for Lost Souls and demons, and the rocket launcher is great for boss fights in large groups. That is, unless they're in a tightly closed space, for which your best bet will be the BFG. I have so much nostalgia for the first time I picked one up. It was like the most exciting feeling in the world. You switch weapons on the fly, which is absolutely necessary for a running gun. Switching guns is quick and easy, and it's something you're going to be doing a lot as you play, so get used to it. Doom is pretty straightforward with how it teaches the player how to play. I mean, hell, right when you start the game, you just begin. Right here, in this room. No cutscene or nothing, we just jump right into this bitch. John Romero's legendary E1M1. Much like Wolfenstein, the levels are structured by finding up to 3 keys that open up more of the level, capping off at the exit. While this structure makes the game work, for boss fights and levels that are just simply big groups attacking you in waves, the doors feel kinda pointless. Like here. Why do we need these skull keys at the end? Why can't I just leave the level? Doesn't this seem a little bit more convoluted? That said, it still serves as a simple and fun way to structure average levels. It's always a nudge in the right direction and creates extreme awareness of your surroundings. After dying again and again, you have to memorize where things are. Sometimes environmental items like barrels can be used to your advantage. The player is constantly in a relationship with their environment, and at many points you even have to explore and fight at the same damn time. Your character is only given 100% health, and with health potions and supercharge, you can get your character as high as 200%. You also only start with a pistol. Every level is built so that if you don't have ammo from a previous level, you can still use what is presented within the level to progress. It's never impossible to get through a level because every level gives you the necessary tools to pull it off from a pistol start. The game is almost perfect. Almost. When it comes to player psychology, right after the first level, you're given an ideal time that challenges the player to try it again but faster. It often feels like the game is mocking you, gaslighting you, manipulating you, which is exactly the kind of atmosphere you want to achieve for a game set in hell. I distinctly remember the first time I played through the second episode, Map 6, I had a hard time trusting the exit because the last level had an imp at the end. Turns out, it was indeed a deceptive ending to the level, as I just ended up getting bombarded with enemies and led back out. The game refuses to give you anything for free, and they want you to learn that. Reluctance is something the game urges you to practice. I have had so many instances of this reluctance, like switching to the minigun, opening the door and seeing nothing, grabbing all the items and seeing nothing, and now that my guard is down, leaving only to get attacked by Bruh. One stage starts with this wide open area and lots of different ways to go. I became skeptical on whether I want to go through the lava or the teleporters. It's like a language the game communicates to you without telling you verbally. Anytime there's a rocket launcher just before you enter a door, it's the game giving you a hint that there's some serious shit on the other side. At the end of episode 1, you're actually teleported to this room full of opponents that are physically impossible to beat. It takes you by such surprise, but brings relief when you find you're meant to die, which is a great juxtaposition to the trickery that soon follows. When you see a lone backpack and a door closes behind you, you don't know what's coming. But something is. You reluctantly pick up a chainsaw and find it's not a trap at all. This seems contradictory, but that's why it's psychological torture. The game is playing you more than you're playing it, which is absolutely something I respect. The main secret to Doom is to expect the unexpected and never panic no matter what bind you get yourself into. Inconsistency can benefit the game in great ways, but this is when it won't impede on a player's performance. Like, you run into this red cross that damages you, which teaches you that red textures are often harmful. This is something the game often uses to bargain with the player. One great example being this mega armor. You gain it in exchange for a little health. Doom urges that you pay attention to the textures as much as you can. Take this switch hidden subtly in the corner of this room, for example. I wouldn't have even found it if it weren't for the slight misplacement in the texture. You have to be attentive, and it's even better when they use textures like this to trick you. At one point, I found this door that I swore was a teleporter, but what the... Oh. I love games like this. There's nothing better than when a game requires focus to be played. It helps me to not think about the fact that we will all be inevitably dead. Although you are playing this game in hell, so... maybe... Here's a blood splotch on the ground. Don't recognize it? Good, because it leads to a door full of imps. Fuck you. Where do you go? I don't know. Maybe where that arrow is pointing, dummy. Oh. Okay, just try the other one. Oh, you're not gonna get the slip on me that easily. I know all your tricks. I'm not following that. That was a plasma rifle. There was a fucking plasma rifle there, and you missed it because the game made you paranoid. That's how much this game fucks with you. Because this game fucks. It's not perfect, however, as it rarely communicates environmental switches, so a lowering ledge is often something the player needs to find themselves. Often when you have no idea what to do, you run along the walls, clicking the action button a million times. This is rarely effective, but the fact that it's an option makes things a tad tedious for a game where you're supposed to be moving fast. Obviously, Doom is a very cruel game, and there's even an entire level dedicated to this. All around the level are different traps that the player has to choose from with no indication of which one is the actual right way to go. The goal isn't to see which one isn't a trap, but to be ready when it does end up being a trap and expect the unexpected. When you drop down to the exit and see an imp, you gotta be ready for that shit. You pick up a key, and the lights go off, and you're getting bombarded with imps. You get to a higher elevation or enter a room, and there's an enemy right behind the doorway every fucking time. Enemies come crawling out of every corner at all times in all places. You can't avoid it. As soon as you pick up that red key card, you better be ready for the teleporting key card squad. The game urges exploration and punishes it at the same time. There was this part where I discovered a new section of the map, only to get fucked in every hole. Some levels just spawn you in the middle of a bunch of... What is this game? This game is insane, dude! Listen, I know this is just a male power fantasy. The game does absolutely nothing to hide that, but I don't know. Sometimes I need a game where you can mow down a fuckload of demons with a chainsaw. Here's a bunch of demons in the middle of a bunch of barrels you could shoot to cause a chain reaction. It's so satisfyingly violent, and this is before the modern titles. Shooting things in this game just feels so good. It's so intense, and the pressure is incredibly cathartic. There was this part I started a level near 4 Barons of Hell that attacked me into a corner, and I had no choice but to accept my death. But I did end up winning that fight, and it was the best feeling in the world. It wasn't even until after the fight that I realized that there was ammo on this level, but that's the cool thing about this game. If you don't use it, it makes you more than ready for the next fight. Constant patience and movement is the key. You just don't get a break in this game. In one room it's a bunch of lost souls, then in the next it's a bunch of specters. You start a level, leave the spawning room, and boom, Caco demons. You think this is gonna be easy? No. You need a red key. Now jump into this narrow hallway with a damaging floor and Caco demons, then work your way through this maze. It is so intense, and I feel like a lot of people forget that. Yeah, it's old, but there's a reason 2016 is as crazy as it is. It's because this is where it started. Admittedly, with the series constantly throwing shit at you, I do have to admit to thinking the boss fight of the 3rd episode was a bit underwhelmingly easy, but it's only easy because of the mental training it took to get you to this part of the game, and also because the boss is pathetic if you have a BFG. It's a simple game to understand, but it's so complex in its ability to teach the player without just directly telling you how to play.
And once it is done, you find yourself back on the green fields of Earth. In a moment of brief respite, you take in the fresh air of your home and bask in the beauty of its lush, familiar scenery. Now overrun by demons. The game pulled one last gaslight on you, and it is the worst one. Your home is now under attack, and your treasured rabbit is dead. Its head impaled on a pike, taunting you right in front of you. You can't escape. Hell pulls you back in. And you know what? So be it. You go back in, thigh flesh consumed by rage, and Jesus Christ, episode 4 is a fucker. Now you know all their tricks. You run the same halls again and again and again until you make these tricksters your bitch. And once you get tired of those halls, you go visit some different halls designed of different hands and clean them out. For years, 23 long years, your reflexes and decision making honed to absolute peak perfection. You grow from the paranoid man you once were and turn the horror back on the demons. They are rage, brutal, without mercy. But you will be worse. Rip and tear until it is done.
Thanks for watching this video, and if you want to see more content, I definitely recommend hitting that subscribe button. You should also check out Chandler's channel. He has a video on Doom Eternal coming out. Both of us are part of a Let's Play / podcast called MYRSA. It also has mid-modulation of the Anime Pussy podcast, Evelyn Red of Boy Motor fame, Base Dr. Worm, and many more. If you want to see more content from me beyond what I've done here, please give this channel a shot.